Hi, my name is Hayk Arsenyan. I'm a pianist and composer, originally from Armenia, but I've been based in New York for quite many years. I have been a composer since I remember myself. So since I was a kid, I composed on the piano, about 3, 4 years old. When it was time for me already to go to school, and in Armenia it starts at 5. So at 5 years old, I went to school and I wanted to study the piano because I was composing on the piano, but the director looked at my fingers and said, no, you gotta start with violin. You need to be a violinist. So I started my early musical education as a violinist at the Yerevan Specialized Music School named after Tchaikovsky. It's one of the best, if not the best, school in Armenia. And I was very lucky to have an incredible teacher, Tatiana Hayrapetyan, who was my teacher in violin, and I had a wonderful teacher there of composition, Melik Mavisakalian. And also, of course, I had a piano teacher there as well, Gayane Nagzian. Those were the 3 of my very first teachers, my very first steps into the world of music. And that was where my musical life really started. At 13, I moved to Paris, where I continued my education at the Paris Conservatory. Then I left violin in Armenia and continued with piano. However, composition was always with me. So I studied there with Ani and Rafi Petrosyan, also Ramzi Yassa at École Normale, and Hubert Guillard at the CNR d'Aubervilliers-La Courneuve. So this was like the next stage of my educational journey. And from Paris, I moved to Moscow, where I continued composition studies with Kirill Volkov, who was actually one of the students of Aram Khachaturian, one of the most famous Armenian composers. As a pianist, I studied with Maria Gambarian and with Evgeny Liberman. Those were amazing teachers again, and in a wonderful school, the Russian Renaissance Academy, where in fact Khachaturian also taught, well, before me, because I was born the year where he unfortunately passed. So, but those were the very first, as I said, steps into this journey. And after Moscow, I moved to the US. I went to continue for my doctoral studies at the University of Iowa. And from there, I moved to New York, where I did professional studies at the Manhattan School of Music with the renowned teacher Solomon Mikovsky. And I was lucky and blessed to have a full tuition scholarship that was granted to me by Yevgeny Kisin for my studies at Manhattan School of Music. And you know, it was in a way symbolic for me to receive this prize from Yevgeny Kisin, because he was one of my idols growing up, and I would have never thought that about 30-some years later, I would have the honor for him to have him, you know, pay my tuition. So that was my lucky moment. And while I was in New York, I also started teaching at NYU. I got a commission from NYU to create a course where I would teach the musicians and dancers to collaborate. The course was called Musical Collaborations. So this course actually was really directly connected to the compositional side of my career, because most of my career is as a pianist. However, I do compose all the time, and some of my compositions are published, and many of them have been performed, and one of them just is going to be released in April 20th. I don't know when this video is going to be out, so whether it will be after the release or before. But yes, the composition is called Stratum, and it is for the bass and piano. My inspirations and influences on my compositional style, of course, have been changing over the years. At first, when I was younger, I was heavily influenced and absolutely fascinated by the virtuosity and virtuosic writing of Rachmaninoff and Liszt. And as I was playing, a lot of Liszt and Rachmaninoff, and in general, romantic, style back then, I felt that it was also affecting my own compositional style too. When I was a kid, I was in my early teens, and as I moved to Paris later on and lived some of my creative and formative years in Paris, of course I got really fascinated and influenced by the lush harmonies and interesting melodic contours of the French composers, such as Messiaen, Ravel, Debussy, of course, Fauré, Poulenc, and they definitely affected. And I mean, I'm still, very much fascinated by and I absolutely love this music. For me, what has always been very important as a composer is the relationship between melody and harmony, and I think that those two are definitely some of the most important components of a musical composition. Nowadays, I'm of course much more interested in experimental styles and minimalism and layering, looping, various use of different meters and tempos at the same time going on, and layering them on top of each other. I really love that. But again, it still does not mean that the melody and harmony are absent. Another really big influence for me, I think, over the years still has been, early music. I mean, I'm a specialist of 18th century Spanish music, and that's what I did my doctorate on. I wrote my dissertation on the keyboard music of Antonio Soler. That's not really something that influenced me as a composer, but much earlier, let's say medieval, Armenian medieval chants, or not only Armenian, but in general, from medieval to pre-classical music, the harpsichord music as well. That is also something that you can probably find some tones of that in my music too. The composition stratum that I had mentioned earlier for bass and piano, in fact, starts with a little bass solo that does have definitely that heavy Armenian medieval chant influence. So, and then of course, I'm going into more experimental, using extended techniques of playing for both bass and for the piano too, plugging, inside the strings, and having, the bass also experiment with different timbres, not for the sake of experimentation and for the sake of novelty, but for the sake of finding new timbres and new musical colors, sound colors, and using those two instruments to create sounds of more than just the two instruments. Having some sort of also percussive instrument sounds and harps and bells and just different. And I think in general, although I have been composing mostly for the piano, I think my the inner hearing as a composer is very orchestral. And even when I'm just performing somebody else's compositions, I still hear it more orchestral way. And I try to portray that, convey that through my music. So some short segments from my compositions that you hear in this video are stratum, just the little opening from that composition. In fact, after the bass solo, because my friend Matt Hare, who is the bass player on the recording that will be released on the Grammy Award winning label Navona by Parma Recordings. He is the one who commissioned the piece and performed so beautifully, but unfortunately he lives in California, so as he's not here, we were not able to include his part. So you do hear a little bit of the piano part from Stratum, a little bit of my poem, which is relatively an older composition, although I did revamp it as my style really developed and changed up. And you do hear quite a nice, closer to the complete segment of my uprooted 2 for the piano. So those are just 3 of my compositions that you hear in this video. I would like to thank the Tanya Leon Foundation for inviting me to be part of their series. It's so wonderful, to be part of their Impact series, and I also wanted to express my thanks to the Old Westbury Gardens and Mansion in Long Island, where we shoot some of the videos. This venue is incredible, and I have been lucky to be one of the resident musicians since, I want to say, 2012. So that concert hall really feels home, and I'm very thankful for them to host us and let us shoot their some of our videos. So and of course, to the ASCAP, to the Union of French Composers in Paris that I've been member of since 1993, the Union of Armenian Composers that I have been member of since 2016, and the Parma Recordings as well. So all of those organizations that have been supporting, expressing my gratitude and looking forward to more collaborations. So thank you very much.